welcome to my witch's cave. My name's Sheila, but as Halloween approaches, I become the Witch of Fife. I'm going to share with you some stories, some Halloween stories from Fife. We're going to meet a witch, the other Witch of Fife. We're going to meet the Wizard of the Deep. We'll meet a ghost who inhabits one of the hills in Fife. And then we'll meet a terrible troll. But before I start my stories, I need to ask you a riddle. Because that's what we witches do. Before you get a story, you need to get a riddle. And I'm going to ask you a riddle at the start of each of my stories. Now, I know you won't be able to tell me the answer right away because you can't speak to me. But once you've worked out the answer, you can tell it to one of the other people who are listening with you. Anyway, my first riddle. The first riddle goes like this. Little Etty Etticoat in her white petticoat and a wee red nose. The longer she stands, the smaller she grows. What am I? Do you want me to tell you again? Little Etty Etticoat in her white petticoat and a wee red nose. The longer she stands, the smaller she grows. We'll see if you can work that one out by the end of our Halloween stories. And my first story is a very, very old story. Something that happened a long, long time ago. Because somewhere in Fife, there lived an old man and his wife. Now the old man, he was a hard-working soul. He was good to everybody, never had a bad word to say. But his wife, well, people said she was a bit flighty. And they used to whisper behind her back. They used to nudge each other and say, "Do you think she's a witch?" And to tell you the truth, her husband used to think that too sometimes, because you see, when the moon was full, she would disappear all night. And when she came back in the morning, she would look as if she'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. And she was so tired, it was as if she'd already done a full day's work. Well, one day, the husband decided he needed to know. So he sat his wife down and he says to her, "Are you a witch?" Well, imagine his surprise when she turned round to him and says, "I am." "Oh no," he says, "you'll be in trouble if anybody finds out." "Oh, I know," she said, "I know, but nobody's going to find out, are they? You won't tell anybody, will you? In fact, if you promise not to tell anybody about me being a witch, I promise that every time I come back from one of my wee adventures, I'll tell you all about it. We never do anything bad, you know. I'm not a bad witch. We're just out having some fun, me and some of my pals. Well, the old man decided that it was really best if a husband knew exactly what his wife was up to. So he agreed he wouldn't tell. So the weeks went by, and once again it was a full moon. And once again the wife disappeared. And when she came back in the morning, he was sitting at the table waiting for her, waiting to hear what she'd been up to. And she told him about how her and some of her friends had gone to the big old tree in the graveyard and had taken a branch from it and had sat on that branch, and they'd flown over the fields, over Loch Leven, and landed in amongst the Lomond Hills, where they met up with other witches and warlocks and wizards and some of the wee folk who were having a party. And oh my, she said, we had some ale that had been brewed by the wee folk themselves. And they gave it to us in wee tiny cups, and oh, it tasted so delicious, like honey. And then one of the wee folk, he brought out some magical pipes and began to play tunes like you'd never heard before. They were so braw that everybody got up and started dancing. And even the fish in the loch and the birds in the sky and the trees stopped what they were doing to listen to the music. Oh, we had a braw time, she said. And then the sun was coming up, so we came home again. Oh, wife, said her husband. Wife, you would have been far better sleeping in your bed last night than partying up in the Lomond Hills. Well, the days went past, and the weeks went past, and again it was another full moon, and once more the wife disappeared. And when she came back the next day, her husband again was waiting for her, and this time she told him of how they'd gone down to the beach and had gathered cockle shells and turned them into boats, and had sailed over the North Sea to the lands of the north. And where they'd got on horses fashioned out of the wind and had ridden over the frozen lands into the hills covered in snow, where wizards and warlocks and witches and gnomes and elves had all gathered for a festival. And oh my, she said, this time we learned so much from the others. They told us some new magic words that can let us travel anywhere we want, and words that let us open any door, turn any key, undo any lock. Well, said her husband, you would have been better off keeping warm in your bed last night rather than partying out in the snow. Well, time went past again, and another full moon came, and once again the witch went off on her travels. But when she came home this time and started to tell her story, her husband was a wee bit more interested, and he started to listen very carefully as she told him how they had used the magic words they'd learned in the frozen north, and they'd flown all the way down to Carlisle and they'd used the magic words to open the doors and unlock the doors and chains, and had landed themselves in the wine cellar of the Bishop of Carlisle. And they'd spent the night sampling his wine. Just a wee drop here and a wee drop there, she said. He's got that much, he'll never notice. Well, when she told him this, her husband thought, I like a wee drop of wine now and again. Can you tell me these words? Maybe I could fly down to the bishop's castle and sample his wine. Oh, no, she said. No way, can't do that. If I tell you the words, you might let them slip to somebody else, and they'll let them slip to somebody else, and soon everybody will know the words. And then everybody will be able to go anywhere they want, and nobody will be safe, and no doors will stay locked. No, I can't tell you. Well, over the next few weeks, the witch's husband tried everything he knew how to persuade her to tell him the words. He pleaded with her. He threatened her. He offered her presents. He nagged her. But she wouldn't tell him. So when the full moon was due again, he made a plan. He slipped out of the house before her and went to her friend's house and hid behind a bush, waiting. And sure enough, his wife and her friends soon gathered at the house, and he heard them talking. Let's go back to the bishop's palace again and hae some more wine. Great, thought her husband as he listened and watched through the window. And he saw them go over to the fireplace, and one by one they put their foot on the big pot that was hanging over the fire. And they said the magic words, and whoosh, up they went, up the lum and out into the night sky. Well, thought her husband, I can do that too. So he went into the house and he went over to the fire, and he too put his foot on the pot that hung over the fire. And he repeated the magic words, and whoosh, before he knew it, he too was flying through the night sky. Now, the witches didn't know he was there, because witches, well, we never look behind us. And so they didn't see him. They didn't know he was there until he too landed with a thump on the floor of the cellar in the bishop's palace. Well, they weren't very pleased to see him there. He wasn't supposed to be there. But there was nothing they could do, so they just carried on sampling the wine. And he decided he would sample it as well, but he drank a wee bit more than they did. He had full tumblers of the stuff instead of just wee tastes. And soon he fell sound asleep on the floor, propped up against one of the casks. And that's where he was, sitting there snoring when it was time for the witches to go. So they decided to leave him there to teach him a lesson. And so about lunchtime next day, when the bishop's servants came into the cellar to get him some wine, they found him there. They couldn't understand how he'd got there, how he was in the cellar when the doors were locked. So they dragged him out and they dragged him before the bishop. Well, the poor man, he was confused. He was all muddled up and he didn't know what was going on, and he was scared. So when the bishop asked him where he'd come from, he said, well, I've come for Fife. I flew through the night sky and landed in your cellar. Well, when the bishop heard that, he made up his mind. This must be a warlock. And what do you do with warlocks? You burn them at the stake. And so he was condemned. They dragged him out of the palace and they put chains round him, chained him to a big stake, and then they built a fire round about him and lit the fire. And as he stood there, the flames beginning to rise around him, he really wished he'd stayed in his bed the night before. But then, just as he had given up all hope, he saw a bird come flying through the sky and landed on his shoulder. Oh, it was his wife, and she was whispering in his ear, remember the words, remember the words. Oh, thank goodness for that, he thought. Thank you, wife, as the bird flew off. And just as the flames were getting higher and higher, he called out, away to Fife! And immediately the chains fell from him and he found himself soaring high above the crowd that had gathered to watch. And as they watched in amazement, he disappeared through the clouds, only to land once again in his own kitchen. Well, from that day on, that old man decided that he was never again going to have anything to do with what his wife got up to. He was going to mind his own business and stay at home. And that's the story of the Witch of Fife. Now, do you remember that wee riddle I told you? Remember it? Little Etty Etticoat in her white petticoat with a wee red nose. The longer she stands, the smaller she grows. Got the answer yet? Well, keep thinking about it. Second story. And this riddle goes like this. I can run, but I never walk. I sometimes murmur, but I never talk. I've got a bed, but I never sleep. And I've got a mouth, but I never eat. What am I? Can you think what that is? Let me say it again. I can run, but I never walk. I often murmur, but I never talk. I've got a bed, but I never sleep. And I've got a mouth, but I never eat. What am I? And while you're thinking about that one, here's another story. And for this story, we're going to go down the coast to the east neuk of Fife, to one of the fishing villages there, probably Anstruther, or maybe Crail or Pittenweem or St Monans. And there lived a laddie called Davy. Now, Davy was quite a young laddie, but in those days, folk got married quite young. So he had a wife. But the thing with Davy was He didn't like fish. Now, a lot of folk didn't like fish. I love fish. Maybe you didn't like it, but Davy really didn't like it. He didn't like the look of it. He didn't like the slimy feeling of it. He didn't like the smell of it. And he certainly didn't like the taste of it. Which was quite awkward, really, because the only job Davy could get was helping an old fisherman on his boat. Day in and day out, Davy would go with the old fisherman out into the sea. And the fisherman would cast his nets and dump the fish that he caught onto the deck of the boat. And it was Davy's job. Pick them up, bash them on the head, cut their heads off, and take out all the gooey guts and throw them away, and then put the fish in a basket. Well, he hated it. He hated doing that, especially that last bit. But one day, he had a whole lot of fish in front of him, and one by one he was picking them up and bashing them on the head and cutting their heads off and pulling out all their guts and throwing it away. When he picked up one fish in particular, and well, it seemed to look at him. It had an eye, and it seemed to look right at him, and he looked more closely at it, and he thought, you know, that's a really bonny fish. It was all sparkly and had lovely colours on it. And its eyes were shining. And you know what? Davy didn't have the heart to kill it. So he hid it behind his back. And a wee while later, when he thought that the skipper of the boat wasn't looking, he got hold of the fish and he slipped it back into the water. Well, unfortunately for him, the skipper had seen him, and he shouted, "Davy, what do you think you're doing? Do you think I come out here in all weathers, all day long, working hard to catch these fish, just for you to throw them back in the water? No, I do not. You're on a final warning, boy." Well, a wee bit later that day, Davy was on a break, and he went and he leaned up against the mast, and he was looking out to sea and trying to cheer himself up. And when he tried to cheer himself up, he started to whistle. Now, he'd forgotten that you're no supposed to whistle on a fishing boat. You see, fishermen believe that if you whistle on a boat, you're whistling up a storm, or you might even be whistling up the devil himself. So when the skipper heard Davy whistling, that was the last straw. "Davy, I told you you weren't to do anything else wrong, and now you have. So you see, when we get back to the harbour, you're sacked. You're fired. I never want to see you back on this boat again." So when they got back to the harbour and Davy climbed up the ladder onto the pier, he was feeling a bit happy, really, because, well, he hated the job anyway. But he was feeling a bit sad as well, because he was going to have to go home and tell his wife he didn't have a job anymore. Well, as he trudged along the path towards his house, he began to realise that he had company. And when he looked round, he saw that, well, there was a man walking alongside him, a rather strange-looking man with a long black cloak on. And he was leading a cow, a black and white cow. And the man spoke to Davy, and the man said, "What are you looking so sad about, Davy?" And Davy told him the story of how he'd got the sack from his job and he was going to have to go home and tell his wife. "Well, I could maybe help you," said the man. "You see this cow here? If you had that cow, well, you wouldn't have to worry about a job. You'd be set for life, because this cow gives the best milk in the whole of Fife, if not the whole of Scotland. And you and your wife, well, you could make cheese and butter and ice cream and yoghurt from that milk. Maybe open a wee tea shop. I know she's always wanted to do that." "Oh, but I can't afford to buy a cow off you," said Davy. "I didn't hae any money." "Well," said the man, "maybe I could help there as well. How would it be if I gave you this cow for 3 years and you kept it and you opened your tea shop and you made your butter and your cheese and your ice cream and your yoghurts? And then after 3 years, I would come back for the cow. But when I came back, well, I would have 3 questions to ask you. And if you were able to answer my questions, well, that would be fine. I would leave you alone. But if you couldn't answer the questions, you didn't know the answers, then you would have to come and work for me in my underground palace." Well, if Davy had looked a bit closer at that man, he would realise that he wasn't any ordinary man. He was the Wizard of the Deep. But Davy wasn't paying attention. And he thought to himself, that sounds like a good deal. 3 years is a long time and he'll probably forget all about it. So he made a pact with the Wizard of the Deep. He shook his hand and he took hold of the cow and he began to walk home. And if he turned round, he would have noticed that as he left, the ground opened up and that wizard disappeared underground in a puff of blue smoke. But Davy didn't notice anything like that. He just kept on walking with his cow towards his house. Now, his wife happened to be looking out the window, waiting for him to come home. And when she saw him coming, well, she thought to himself, I've seen it all now. Quite often Davy brought friends home for their tea. Sometimes he brought a basket of fish home for her to cook. But today he had a cow. What on earth was he wanting with a cow? Well, Davy went in and says, wife, I've given up the fishing. I didn't like it. And I've got hold of this cow. And I hear it gives really braw milk. I thought we could open up a wee tea shop and sell cheese and butter and ice cream and yoghurt. We'll be sorted for life. And so that's what they did. Davy and his wife opened a wee tea shop And yeah, they made butter and cheese and ice cream and yogurts. And soon the news of this new tea shop spread far and wide, and people came from all over just to taste the wonderful things that they sold. And so the 3 years passed, and Davy and his wife were doing really well for themselves. But 3 years later, it was a Saturday. The shop had been really busy. Davy's wife was cleaning in the kitchen, and Davy was sweeping the floor and tidying up because it was closing time. Everybody had gone, except for one man who was sitting in the corner, a stranger. He didn't know who it was. And as he swept the floor, the doors of the cafe burst open, and there in all his glory was the Wizard of the Deep. A hat on full of jellyfish and seaweed on his beard, seaweed hanging from everywhere. An awful looking sight he was too. And Davy then realised that this was who he'd made the deal with. Aye, Davy, he says, I've come to ask you your questions. Are you ready? Now, Davy was going to say he was, but before he could get a word out, the man in the corner stood up and said, aye, he is ready. And that was your first question. Well, the wizard was a wee bit annoyed about this. And he says, tell your friend to mind his own business, will you know. And again, before Davy could answer, the man said, he'll no tell me to mind my own business. And that was your second question. Well, the wizard was getting even angrier now. And he says to Davy, who is this man who keeps butting in? And the man stood up and said, I am the king of the fish. 3 years ago, Davy saved my life. He put me back in the water. And so I've come to return the favour. And that was your third question. Well, the wizard was so furious, he stamped his foot on the ground, leaving a footprint in the concrete. And then he twirled round and disappeared out the door in a puff of blue smoke, never to be seen again. And you know what? He was in such a hurry to get away, he never took the cow with him. And so, as far as I know, Davy and his wife are still running that wee cafe. So if you're round East Neuk and Crail or Anstruther or Pittenweem or St Monans and you go into a cafe there, look at the floor, and if you see a footprint, then you'll know that you're in Davy's cafe. And that's the story of Davy and the fish. Now, do you remember the second riddle I told you? I'll just repeat it in case you've forgotten it. I can run, but I never walk. I sometimes murmur, but I never talk. I've got a bed, but I never sleep. And I've got a mouse, but I never eat. What am I? That's 2 riddles you've got now. I hope you can work out the answers. Now, it wouldn't be Halloween stories if I didn't have a ghost story to tell you. But before I tell you my ghost story, I've got another riddle for you. I have seas, but no water. I have coasts, but no sands. I have towns, but no people. And I have mountains, but no land. What am I? Can you think what that is? I'll say it again. I have seas, but no water. I have coasts, but no sand. I have towns, but no people. And I have mountains, but no land. What am I? And while you're working that out, here's a ghost story. Round the coast of Fife, overlooking the Firth of Forth, there stands a hill called Largo Law. And not far away from Largo Law, there's another much smaller hill called Norrie's Law. And these 2 hills are surrounded by legend. The folk who live round that way say that somewhere deep inside Largo Law there is buried a hoard of gold. And the folk say that if your sheep come home with some yellow tinges on their wool, then they've been lying on top of that gold. They also say that the hill is haunted by a terrible spectre who guards the gold, who buried that gold many, many years ago. Some say he was a robber, some say he was a pirate, but he's been condemned to wander the slopes of the hill until someone is brave enough to ask him where the gold is. And when he can reveal his secret, then and only then will he rest in peace. Now, working on the farm of Balmain near the hill, there was a shepherd. This shepherd was a greedy man, and he became obsessed with the idea of finding the gold. He didn't have any friends, and he thought if he found the gold he would be rich, and then he would have plenty friends. And so day after day and night after night he wandered the slopes of the hill, waiting, watching, looking, until one cold, cold winter's night. He'd been out on the hill all day and he was just thinking about going home when he noticed a mist gathering up near the top of the hill. A strange looking mist that seemed to move about and turn itself into different shapes. And he thought, maybe, just maybe, this is the ghost. So he climbed the hill towards the mist, and as he got closer, it began to change its shape again until it formed an enormous, terrible-looking spectre. A huge ghost with bulging, staring eyes. Taking all the courage he had in his hands, the shepherd spoke to this ghost. And he said, tell me where the gold is, and then you can rest in peace. Tell me where it is. And with that, the ghost turned his eyes and stared into the eyes of the shepherd, chilling him to the very bone. And the spectre called out, if the Auchendowie cockerel doesna craw, and the herd of Balmain doesna blaw, I'll tell you where the gold is on Largo Law. Be here the morn, and dinna be late, for I'll no wait past the hour o' 8. And with that, the mist disappeared. Well, the shepherd thought, that's it. I'm going to get the gold. I'm going to be rich. And so he made his way back down the hill. Now, what did he have to do? The Auchendowie cockerel doesn't hate a craw. Well, I'll soon sort that. And the herd of Balmain doesn't blaw. Well, that's Tammy Norrie. I'll soon sort him out and make sure he doesn't blow his horn in the morning. So the next day, the folk on Auchendowie Ferrum, well, they all slept in because the cockerel hadn't woken them up. And when the farmer went to look for it, he found it lying dead on the midden. And later on, Tammy Norrie was letting the cows out of the byre when he noticed the shepherd leaning on the gate, and the shepherd beckoned to him. Now, Tammy Norrie kent that nobody had a good word to say about this shepherd, but the shepherd had never done him any harm before. So he went out and said, aye, what do you want? And the shepherd said, you've no to blow your horn the night to bring the coos in. And if you do, you'll be in trouble. Well, Tammy Norrie just shook his head and said, aye, all right then, we'll see. And he went about his business. Well, the day dragged on, but soon the hour o' 8 was approaching, and the shepherd made his way up to the top of the hill. And sure enough, the mist appeared again, and the terrible spectre formed itself out of the moving, swirling mist. And he was just about to reveal where the gold was hidden, when in the distance there was the unmistakable sound of a cow horn being blown. Well, the spectre let out a terrible shriek and shouted out, woe to the man who blew that horn, for from that spot he'll never be born. And with that he disappeared. Well, the shepherd was furious. He stomped off down the hill towards the farm with murder in his heart. But when he got there, he was too late. Tammy Norrie was stood there with the horn at his lips, but the curse of the ghost had turned him into stone. Now the people from the villages and farms round about all came and tried to move Tammy Norrie, but they couldn't. He was stuck there. So all they could do was pile earth around him and turn him into a hill. a hill that they called from that day on Norrie's Law. And that's the story of the gold o' Largo Law. Now, have you worked out the third riddle yet? Well, let me remind you. I have seas, but no water. I have coasts, but no sand. I have towns, but no people. And I have mountains, but no land. What am I? Now, before I tell you my last story, I've got another riddle for you. Don't worry, I'll tell you all the answers after the next story. Here's the fourth riddle. Cracking, creaking, crunching, meat inside my bones. My eyes are on my back, and I have hands that crush stones. What am I? Will I say it again? Creaking, cracking, crunching, meat inside my bones. My eyes are on my back, and I have hands that can crush stones. What am I? And while you're thinking about that, here is my last story. A long time ago, there lived a fisherman and his wife in a wee cottage somewhere beyond Kirkcaldy, right down on the coast. Now, the fisherman had a wee boat, and he would push it out from the beach every morning and go out with his nets and try to catch fish. And he tried very hard to catch fish, but he never really had very much luck. Sometimes he would be out all day and he would maybe catch 2 fish or 3 fish, or sometimes he didn't catch any at all. And so they were very poor. And when he went back home without any fish, well, his wife would be really angry with him. She would shout at him, "You're a useless fisherman. How do you expect us to survive if you didn't bring home any fish? This is ridiculous. We'll all starve. Can you not go out and catch some decent amount of fish? You're just rubbish." And she would argue and argue with him. And the poor man, well, he really tried, but he never seemed to have much luck. But one day, he decided he was going to go out there with his boat, and he was going to stay all day, and he wasn't going to come home again until he caught something. And that's what he did. Took his net and he cast it over the side of the boat, and he waited, but weren't any fish. So he tried again and again and again, and the day was going on and it was starting to get a bit dark, and still he hadn't caught any fish at all. So he decided to move down a wee bit down the coast, a wee bit further out, and try a bit that he'd never tried before and see if he could catch something. And so he threw his net out and pulled it in, but still there was no fish. But then he noticed there was something caught in the net, something strange. So he pulled the net in and he cleared away all this seaweed that was caught about in it. And there, to his amazement, was a bottle. A bottle like he'd never seen before. It was all wrapped in seaweed, and he had to clean it all off, and it was quite shiny, but he couldn't see in it. And it had a big cork in the top, and it was all tied on with string. And he thought to himself, oh, I wonder what's in that bottle. Wonder if there's anything interesting in it. So he got out his knife and he began to prise away at the cork until eventually it popped out. And he had a wee look inside and had a wee sniff. But as he did, smoke began to pour out of the bottle. Thick, black smoke that swirled and swirled up and up and up into the clouds. And then that smoke began to turn itself into the most horrendous creature he'd ever seen. There was two great big feet planted in the bottom of the boat that nearly took up all the space. And these great big feet only had 3 toes. And then there was legs appeared from the feet, dressed in green breeches. And they seemed to be tied up with a great big sash. And this creature had a big belly hanging over the sash. And then you noticed its hands, they were almost as big as his feet. And he only had 3 fingers. And as the fisherman, terrified, looked up, he saw this head, a head covered in long, straggly hair like seaweed, and he had a beard that was long and straggly too. And 2 big staring eyes, and a big red mouth that was full of teeth that were like tombstones. Well, the fisherman was terrified, and he was even more terrified when the creature spoke to him and said, "Fisherman, do you know what you've done?" And the fisherman said, I haven't done anything. I just pulled a bottle in out of the water, and I took the cork out, and you came out of it, and I didn't mean any harm. I wasn't doing anything. I didn't even know who you are. Well, the creature said, I am the genie of that bottle. I have been imprisoned inside it for 700 years, since I fell out with my master, the Wizard of Balwearie, who stayed in a castle over in Kirkcaldy. When I fell out with him, he cast a spell on me and imprisoned me in that bottle, and he threw the bottle out into the Firth of Forth, and I have lain there on the bottom of the sea for all this time. For the first 300 years, I promised myself that if somebody would rescue me, I would make them rich beyond their dreams. I would give them gold and silver and diamonds and pearls, as much as they wanted. But nobody came and rescued me. So for the next 300 years, I promised that whoever rescued me would get 3 wishes. They could wish for anything they wanted, and their wishes would be granted. But still nobody came and rescued me. So for the last 100 years, I've been really quite angry. And I have promised myself that whoever rescued me, I would kill them and stuff them in that bottle and throw the bottle out to sea so they could lie there forever. And fisherman, that one is you. Oh, well, I don't know why you should be like that. I have rescued you after all, but I suppose, you're a big, powerful genie, and I'm just a wee fisherman. And if you're going to kill me and put me in the bottle, well, there's not an awful lot I can do about it. Well, while they're busy talking about it, they're making that much noise that the fisherman's wife appears down on the beach to find out what's going on. And she sees this terrible creature towering over her husband. And she says, "What's going on here? Who's this?" And her husband says, "Well, it's a genie. He was in that bottle and I rescued him and I let him out, and now he's going to kill me and put me in the bottle and throw me out to sea. And I didn't think it's fair." "Oh, stuff and nonsense," said his wife. "That great big creature like you came out of that wee bottle? I didn't believe you. No, you're some sea creature that's come to bother us. No, I didn't believe you came out of that bottle." "Aye, I did," said the genie. "I came out of that bottle. I've been in it for 700 years and now I've come out of it." No. You're huge. Look at you. Your head's away up in the clouds. No, you couldn't fit in that bottle. I didn't believe you." "Yes, I can," said the genie. "No, you can't." "Yes, I can." "Well, show me," said the fisherman's wife. "Right then," said the genie, "I will." And with that, he turned himself back into smoke and disappeared back inside the bottle. Well, as soon as he had, the fisherman's wife picked up the cork and stuffed it back into the bottle. And then she took hold of that bottle and she threw it as far out to sea as she could. And that was the last they ever saw of the genie. But it's not the last we hear about the fisherman and his wife, because from that day on, that fisherman never ever had any trouble catching fish. His net was always full and his baskets were always full. So maybe the genie did bring him some luck after all. And that's another old story about the genie and the fisherman. And now, before I say bye-bye, let's see if you got the right answers to the riddles. Remember the first one? Little Etty Etticoat in her white petticoat with a wee red nose. The longer she stands, the smaller she grows. Well, the answer to that one is a candle. And the second one, I can run but never walk. I often murmur but never talk. I have a bed but I never sleep, and I have a mouth but I never eat. What am I? Did you get that one? Yeah, it's a river. Because you see, a river runs, but it doesn't walk. It murmurs as it flows along, but it doesn't talk. We talk about the river bed, don't we? But the river never sleeps. And when the river reaches the sea, it has a mouth, but it doesn't eat. So that's the answer to that one. The next one, I have seas, but no water. I have coasts, but no sands. I've got towns, but no people. I've got mountains, but no land. What am I? Did you get it? It's a map. Think about it. It's a map. And the last one, I think this one was a wee bit trickier. Creaking, cracking, crunching. Meat inside my bones. Eyes upon my back. And hands that can crush stones. What am I? Well, I'm a crab. Think about it. A crab. Crab meat is inside its hard shell, inside its bones, and got eyes on its back, and its pincers can crush stones. I hope you got some of these riddles, and I hope you enjoyed some of these Halloween stories. And I hope you weren't too scared. Bye for now and have a happy Halloween.